Right. So April 5th, 2025. Big day, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, millions in the streets.
Everywhere, right? All 50 states, even internationally. Like, wow, that's
Yeah. That's not something you see every day. It's a sign that something big is happening, for sure.
yeah, it really is. And for this deep dive, we've got a ton of stuff to go through. We got those YouTube transcripts from Inside Edition, ABC7 to see kind of what was happening on the ground. Then we got some of the broader international stuff like the Hindu, Verindia, even Indisputable with Dr. Rashad Rishi, and then these, pasted text things with like the pestle swap most spear analysis. So
Yeah, we've got a really good mix of sources here, a good blend of like the on-the-ground perspectives,
yeah.
the bigger picture analysis, so we can really unpack this hands-off thing.
Yeah, exactly right. Like what was going on? Why are people so upset? And what does it all mean? Right?
That's the goal, right? To
Okay.
go beyond just like, the headlines and the sound bites and give you, the listener a good understanding of what was really going on without making it too complicated.
Yeah, exactly. A nice, clear picture.
So let's just jump right in then. So what was it? What was making people so mad? Why were they in the streets?
Well, it seems like the main thing bringing everyone together was this like opposition to a lot of the Trump administration's policies in the second term. It wasn't just
Yeah.
like one single issue, but it was more like
Like a bunch of stuff all at once.
yeah, exactly. Like a whole bunch of different anxieties and concerns that all kind of came together.
Like a perfect storm, kind of.
Yeah, kind of like that. And if you look closer, certain themes keep popping up. Like there was this big pushback against all that government downsizing, all those federal workers getting laid off.
Oh, yeah. And one of those pasted text things even mentioned Elon Musk being involved in that, right?
Yeah.
Like restructuring stuff.
Hmm.
So it makes you wonder about how much influence like really rich people have on the government and public services,
For sure. I mean, it brings up all these questions about, like, is it about efficiency? Are they trying to make things better? Or is it more about, control and power? And what happens when you let the private sector get too involved in things that are traditionally public?
Yeah, yeah. And then on top of that, you have the proposed cuts to Social Security and Medicare. I mean, those are like lifeline programs for a lot of people, especially older folks and people who are struggling. I mean, you could really hear the fear and the anger in those news reports.
It's understandable, right? These programs are supposed to be there to help people when they need it most. And the idea that they might be cut back is terrifying for a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it wasn't just about like money and jobs, right?
Mm.
There were all these rollbacks of LGBTQ plus rights that people were really worried about. Things like healthcare, employment, education. You saw that everywhere in the news.
Yeah, definitely. It's about basic human rights. It's about being treated fairly and having the same opportunity as everyone else. And people felt like those rights were under attack, so they pushed back.
Okay, so we got people worried about jobs, worried about healthcare, worried about rights. And then Verindia brought up this whole thing about the tariffs,
Mm.
and how they could really hurt the tech industry, like AI development, cloud infrastructure, even just building data centers, because all the materials like steel, aluminum, servers, chips, everything's going to be more expensive.
Yeah.
So it's not just like some old school economics problem, right? This is affecting everyone.
That's a really important point. It's easy to think about tariffs as like a boring economics thing, but they have real world consequences. And in today's world, tech is everything, right? So if you mess with the tech industry, you're messing with the whole economy.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got the stuff about the deportations and Inside Edition and
Yeah.
ABC7, and then that proposal to like get rid of the Department of Education that ABC7 was talking about. I mean, those are huge things that affect real people's lives.
Yeah, no doubt about it. These are policies that can literally tear families apart or decide whether kids get a good education or not. It's not just abstract political stuff, it's real life.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like underneath all these specific things, there was this kind of a bigger worry about like democracy itself. I mean, people were using the word authoritarianism a lot.
Yeah.
And, that hands-off slogan, it really captures that feeling of like, we need to protect our freedoms.
Yeah, for sure. That slogan was brilliant because it's so simple, but it speaks to so many different things. It's about saying no to government overreach. It's about defending your rights. It's about standing up for democracy. And it clearly resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah, it did. And it wasn't just like a few people here and there, right? This was massive. Over 1,400 protests in all 50 states, plus all those demonstrations in Canada, Europe.
Hmm.
Inside Edition and ABC7 had all those pictures and videos from everywhere. It was huge.
I mean, that's what's so striking about it. It wasn't just like a local thing. This was a nationwide, even a global phenomenon. People all over the world were reacting to the same things.
Yeah, it's almost like everyone was feeling it. And it wasn't just random either. This was organized. Inside Edition, the Hindu Varindia, they all talked about how all these different groups were working together, over 150 of them. Civil rights groups, pro-democracy groups, labor unions. I mean, one of the pasted text things even listed some of them by name, like Indivisible, Planned Parenthood Action Fund, the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, that's impressive, right? To get that many different groups to work together on something like this, it takes a lot of coordination. And it shows you how seriously they were taking it.
Yeah, for sure. And the protests themselves weren't all the same either. You had the rallies and marches, of
Yeah.
course, but then there were also those teach-ins, community gatherings. I mean, ABC7 even showed that picture of the Statue of Liberty in shackles. It's powerful stuff.
It shows you the creativity and the passion that people were bringing to this. They
Mm.
weren't just following some script. They were finding their own ways to express themselves and make their voices heard.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So to make sense of all this, we have these analytical frameworks, right? These tools to help us understand what was going on. Let's start with PESTLE. It's like looking at the protests from 6 different angles: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal.
Yeah, Pestle is a good way to get a big picture view of this situation. So, politically, it's pretty clear that these protests were a direct challenge to the administration and its policies. And then, economically, a lot of the anxieties around jobs, healthcare, social programs, all that stuff, played a huge role in getting people out on the streets.
Yeah, yeah. So what about the social side of things?
Socially, these protests really highlight the power of collective action. People coming together to demand change. And then you have all these different demographic groups that felt particularly targeted by the administration's policies, and they were really vocal in their opposition.
And technology too, right? I mean, I can't imagine something like this happening without social media and all that.
Absolutely. Social media was huge in spreading the word, organizing the protests, getting people connected. And then you had all the live streaming and all that, which meant that even if you weren't there in person, you could still be a part of it. But of course, the downside is you also have the potential for misinformation and all that stuff to spread quickly, too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So what about the environment and the legal side of things? How did those fit in?
Well, environmentally, I think for a lot of people, there was this underlying concern that all the government downsizing could lead to less environmental protection. And then legally, it's interesting because obviously people have the right to protest. But then you have all these questions about how the police respond to the protests and whether they're using excessive force. And then you have the potential for new laws to be passed that could restrict people's right to protest.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's PESTLE. Now let's look at SWAT. This one's more about the movement itself, right? The strengths and weaknesses and what it could do, what it should be careful of.
Exactly. So, starting with strengths, I mean, the sheer number of people involved was a huge strength. Millions of people across the country. It's hard to ignore that. And then the fact that it was such a diverse coalition of groups that gave them a lot of power, too.
Yeah, that's a good point. So many different voices all coming together. So what about weaknesses? Where were they vulnerable?
Well, one potential weakness is that when you have so many different groups involved, it can be hard to stay united. Everyone might have slightly different goals or priorities, and that can lead to disagreements and fragmentation. And then there was also some talk about how certain groups within the broader progressive movement might not have felt fully represented in these protests.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, keeping people engaged and keeping the media focused on the issue over the long term, that's always a challenge, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So opportunities. What were some of the things they could achieve with all this momentum?
Well, I think there was a real opportunity to put pressure on lawmakers to change course on some of these policies, like the federal layoffs, Social Security, LGBTQ plus rights, all that stuff. And then beyond that, there was this potential to really energize grassroots activism and get more people involved in politics, maybe even lead to higher voter turnout in the next election.
Yeah, I could see that. And what about threats? What were some of the things they had to watch out for?
Well, the biggest threat was probably political backlash. The administration and its supporters trying to discredit the protests and the people involved. And then you also have the risk of media fatigue, where the media just moves on to the next story and people forget about what's happening. And then, like I said before, internal divisions within the coalition could also weaken the movement.
Yeah, Okay, so let's move on to most. This is all about strategy, right? Like, how do you actually achieve your goals?
Right. So the mission of the hands-off movement was basically to protect democracy and resist what they saw as authoritarianism. It was about standing up for vulnerable communities and making sure that everyone had a fair shot. And it was about pushing back against the influence of big money in politics.
And what were the specific things they were hoping to accomplish?
Well, they wanted to stop the funding cuts, protect LGBTQ plus rights, save Social Security and Medicare, basically, reverse all the policies they were protesting against. And they also wanted to build a stronger grassroots movement that could continue to fight for these things in the long run.
So how did they plan to do all that? What was their strategy?
Their strategy was really based on the power of collective action, mass demonstrations, rallies, getting as many people involved as possible, and then also working at the local level, getting people talking in their communities, building support.
Yeah, okay. And the tactics, like the actual things they were doing.
So they had the marches, the rallies, the teach-ins. They were using social media to get the word out and mobilize people. And they were also trying to get the attention of the media and bring in high-profile speakers to raise awareness.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. Spear. This one's interesting because it tells a story, right? Like what happened, why it happened, what people did about it, and what the results were.
Yeah, spear is good for understanding the cause and effect of things. So the situation that led to these protests was basically the Trump administration's policies,
Yeah.
all that stuff we talked about earlier, the downsizing, the cuts, the attacks on LGBTQ plus rights. People felt like their country was heading in the wrong direction.
Right, right. And what was the problem from their perspective?
Well, the problem was that these policies were going to hurt people.
Yeah.
People were going to lose their jobs, their health care, their rights. And they felt like the government wasn't listening to them, that it was only interested in helping the rich and powerful.
So what happened when they started protesting? What were the immediate effects?
Well, first of all, it raised awareness, right? Suddenly everyone was talking about these issues. And then you started to see politicians speaking out in support of the protesters and different organizations joining the movement. And it wasn't just in the U.S. either. The protests got a lot of international attention, too.
Yeah, it was hard to ignore. And what did the protesters actually do to try and change things?
Well, they did a lot of different things. They organized those big demonstrations. They held teach-ins to educate people about the issues. They were active on social media, trying to get their message out. And they were also lobbying politicians, trying to persuade them to change their minds about these policies.
And what was the outcome of all that? Did they get what they wanted?
It's hard to say for sure at this point. It's still pretty early. But there were some positive signs. Some state lawmakers pledged to resist the federal cuts. Some big companies and nonprofits came out in support of the protesters. And it definitely forced the government to pay attention to the issue.
Yeah, for sure. So it seems like most of the protests were peaceful, but there was that one incident mentioned in Indisputable with Dr. Rashad Rishi, right? Yeah. The guy with the AR-15.
Yeah, that was scary. It's a reminder that things can escalate quickly and that not everyone is going to be on board with the protests.
Yeah, yeah. And the Hindu had that quote from one of the protesters who said that even though there were millions of people out there, they needed even more people to get involved. It's like they knew that this was just the beginning, you know?
Yeah, I think that's common in social movements. There's always this feeling that they need to keep building momentum, keep the pressure on.
And finally, there was the sociology workshop document, which talked about the values behind the protests. It's interesting because it really gets to the heart of what people were fighting for.
Yeah, it was all about defending democracy, protecting civil rights, making sure everyone has access to essential services like healthcare and education. It was about fairness and equality and making sure that everyone has a chance to succeed.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap things up, what we saw on April 5th, 2025 was pretty amazing, right? Millions of people all over the country and even around the world standing up for what they believe in. It was about jobs, it was about health care, it was about rights, it was about democracy, it was about a whole lot of things.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is how all these different issues came together to create this massive movement. It shows you how interconnected everything is, and it shows you the power of people coming together to demand change.
Yep, exactly. And when you look at the big picture, it's clear that this could have a real impact on the future. It could change the way we think about politics. It could lead to new laws and policies. It could even inspire similar movements in other parts of the world.
It's a reminder that change is possible.
Yeah.
That even when things seem really bad, people can come together and make a difference.
Yeah, for sure. So here's something to think about. Given everything we've talked about today, all the different factors involved in these hands-off protests, What do you think is the most important thing for the movement to succeed in the long run? Is it staying united? Is it keeping the pressure on politicians? Is it getting even more people involved? Or is there something else entirely that's going to make the difference? It's a big question,
Yeah.
and I don't think there's an easy answer, but it's something worth thinking about.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll catch you next time.
See you later.